There are moments that split a life in two, before and after. For Princess Charlotte of Edenmere, that moment didn't arrive in a throne room or a state ceremony. It arrived on a Tuesday, in a school corridor, with the sound of laughter that wasn't kind. She was 11 years old when they first sent her to Whitmore Academy. The idea had been her mother's, Queen Isabeau's carefully constructed gift to a daughter she worried was growing up behind too much glass. Let her know the world, the Queen had told the Royal Council, her voice carrying that particular softness she only used when she'd already decided. Let her know real children. The Council had deliberated for 6 weeks, security assessments, background checks, a 40-page document on acceptable lunchroom protocols. Charlotte had packed her own bag the night before, navy blazer, but new pencil case, a small, battered copy of The Secret Garden she'd had since she was 6, its spine held together by sheer stubbornness, and 2 strips of medical tape. She didn't sleep. Not because she was scared. She told herself that very firmly, lying in the dark of her 4-poster bed with its embroidered canopy, and its quiet that was the specific quiet of rooms that had never heard a television. She just wasn't tired. Sergeant Declan Foyle had been assigned to the princess's detail 3 years prior. He was 41, Cork-born, the kind of man whose face gave nothing away, not warmth, not severity, just a steady, granite readiness that had taken him 20 years in royal service to perfect. He'd guarded 2 other children of the royal house before Charlotte, knew the rhythms of it, the school runs, the activity pickups, the polite, practiced invisibility required of a man in a dark suit standing outside a ballet studio while Vivaldi leaked under the door. He thought he knew what this assignment would be. He drove her to Whitmore Academy on that first Tuesday morning. She sat in the back of the car with her hands folded in her lap, not the performative composure of a child trained to perform composure, but something else. Like she was holding herself together with her own 2 hands and concentrating on the job. He watched her in the rearview mirror. She didn't notice. She was looking out the window at a dog being walked by a man in a yellow raincoat, and something in her expression, the way her chin lifted slightly, told him she was cataloging it, filing it away. Normal thing, real thing, mine now. He said nothing. But the car stopped at the academy gates. The other children were arriving in clusters, loud and careless in the way that children are when they've never had to think about being watched. Charlotte watched them for a moment through the glass. Then she opened the door herself, before Davies, the second officer, could reach the handle, and walked through the gates like she'd done it 1,000 times. Declan Foyle watched her go. She'll be fine, he thought. He was right about exactly one thing that day. The first month was, not fine, but survivable. The other children were cautious around her in the way that people are cautious around something they don't know how to categorize. She wasn't a celebrity exactly, wasn't a normal girl exactly. She was a Charlotte-shaped puzzle that nobody had the box for, and so they left her largely alone, which was its own particular loneliness, the kind that has good manners and never raises its voice. She sat in the 3rd row in English, middle of the pack in maths. She ate her lunch, a cheese sandwich she'd made herself, a small act of independence she'd negotiated with some difficulty, at the end of a table near the window, reading her book. She told no one about the book. She was learning fast which parts of herself to keep quiet. Her teacher, Ms. Arundel, was a woman of 40-something with reading glasses perpetually shoved into her hair and a genuine love of Virginia Woolf that she tried, with varying success, to inflict on Year 7. She treated Charlotte with the careful neutrality of someone who had been extensively briefed and was doing her level best to unbrief herself in real time. Charlotte liked her for it. Oh, she liked also the boy who sat 1 row ahead of her in English, Theo, who had a habit of tapping his pen against his notebook in Morse code patterns that Charlotte recognized because she'd spent a month teaching herself Morse code the previous summer when the palace Wi-Fi had gone down for 3 days. She never told him she could read it. She just listened. Bored, 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 he tapped. Same, she thought. The girl who started everything was named Margot. Margot Belfond. She was the daughter of a diplomat, and she wore that fact like a blazer that fit better than anyone else's. 13 years old and already in possession of the precise social architecture that some people spend their whole lives constructing, who to talk to, who to dismiss, and crucially, how to make the dismissal look effortless. Oh, she had copper hair and a laugh like a small decorative knife. Charlotte first registered her properly on a Wednesday in week 5, when Margot stopped in the corridor outside the library and looked at Charlotte's book. Not The Secret Garden, a different one today, Agatha Christie, dog-eared at the corner, and said with a smile that had no warmth behind it at all, "Is that the kind of thing they teach you to read in palaces? Bit pedestrian, isn't it?" Her two friends laughed. Charlotte looked up. She held Margot's gaze for a moment, just a moment, and then went back to her book. That was her first mistake, not the silence, the returning to the book, because it told Margot something useful, that Charlotte had somewhere else to go inside her head. And Margot filed that away the same way Charlotte filed away the man in the yellow raincoat. Weakness. Mine now. It escalated in the way these things always escalate, slowly and then all at once. The comments were always plausibly deniable. "Is that a palace-approved lunch?" when Charlotte unpacked her sandwich. "Does your bodyguard tuck you in at night?" In front of a cluster of year 8s who didn't know Charlotte well enough to care either way, but laughed anyway, because Margot was funny, and laughing at Margot's jokes was a form of social currency that bought you at least a week of safety. Charlotte didn't say anything. She'd been trained in 100 quiet ways to be contained, gracious, to understand that a princess who loses her temper loses far more than an argument. It was a lesson her mother had delivered not in speeches, but in the particular way the queen's chin lifted when she was in pain and couldn't show it. A millimeter of elevation that said, "I am still standing and nothing else." Charlotte's chin lifted too. Margot noticed that as well. Declan Foyle noticed it from the gates. He couldn't hear what was said. He was too far back, protocol keeping him at the boundary of her space while being always within it. But he had 20 years of reading situations from a distance. He had studied the specific geometry of cruelty, how it clusters, how it positions itself, how the target's shoulders carry the weight of it even when their face doesn't. He watched Charlotte's shoulders. He said nothing. His job was not to intervene in the social architecture of 11-year-olds, or his job was threat assessment, physical safety. The defined and documented parameters of his role were clear on this. He went home that Wednesday evening and sat in his kitchen and ate reheated pasta and watched the news and did not think about the way Princess Charlotte of Edenmere walked back from that corridor with her book held against her chest, like a shield she didn't want anyone to know she was carrying. He was almost successful. By the second month, the thing had grown teeth. It was no longer just Margot. It was the 6-person orbit around Margot, each of them performing their loyalty to her in the only currency available, participation. And it was no longer just comments. It was the moved chair at the lunch table. "Oh, is someone sitting here? I didn't see your name on it." The group project that somehow reconstituted itself without Charlotte. The Instagram story of the after-school gathering she hadn't been invited to, tagged with the school's location, posted at 4:07 p.m. when Charlotte would be in the car back to the palace, and timed, Charlotte suspected this with a precision she couldn't prove, for maximum visibility. She didn't have Instagram. That wasn't the point. Theo saw it. He showed her on his phone in the library, his expression uncertain, offering it the way people offer bad news, apologetically, as if the offering itself might somehow soften the content. Charlotte looked at it. "That's nice for them," she said. Theo looked at her for a long moment. "You're strange," he said. but not unkindly, like it was an observation he respected. She almost smiled. She told her mother none of it. And not because she was ashamed, or not only because of that, but because telling the Queen meant the Queen would do something, and whatever the Queen did would have the specific texture of royal intervention, careful and thorough and absolute, and then it would be over. Cauterized, resolved on paper, and Charlotte would have been rescued. She was 11 years old and she already understood, with a clarity that probably shouldn't have been available to her at 11, that there were things you could be rescued from and things you had to walk out of yourself, and that the difference between them was the difference between surviving something and being changed by it. She wanted to be changed. She just hadn't figured out into what yet. Sergeant Foyle drove her home on a Thursday in week 7. But she was quiet in the back seat. Not the cataloging quiet of that first morning, but a different thing. Heavier. Like a room where the furniture has been rearranged and you keep reaching for the chair that isn't there anymore. He drove. At the 3rd traffic light, without looking in the mirror, he said, "Tough day." Not a question. Not an opening for conversation. Just 2 words set down in the car like a small, plain object. Charlotte didn't answer for a moment. Then, "I'm fine." "I know," he said. They didn't speak again until they reached the palace gates. But something had shifted. Some millimeter of the distance between them. She noticed it. He pretended not to notice that she noticed. 20 years in royal service. He knew how to hold a secret steady. End of part 1. The thing Declan Foyle had never told anyone. Not his commanding officer, not the palace's family liaison, not the priest he saw at Christmas and Easter out of a habit that had outlasted his faith, was that he had a daughter. Had. Past tense, that lived in present tense. The kind of loss that doesn't archive itself neatly. Chauvin. She would have been 14 now, red-haired like her mother, and loud in the way that certain children are loud, not recklessly, but joyfully, like the volume was a side effect of being so completely themselves. She had been 11 when she died, a thing no one needed the details of, a thing that had happened, past tense. He wasn't a man given to drawing parallels. Sentimentality was something he'd sealed off long ago, the way you seal a room you've stopped using, kept the door shut. So kept walking past it. But Princess Charlotte was 11. And she held her books against her chest like Chauvin had held her hurling stick on the days things at school had been bad. He drove her to Whitmore Academy every morning. He kept walking past the door. Week 8 brought rain. Not the photogenic kind, not the gray-skied British watercolor rain that looks almost beautiful in photographs, but the relentless horizontal, makes everything smell like wet wool kind that Declan associated with November in Cork and with the specific misery of standing outside buildings waiting. He stood outside Whitmore's main entrance at 3:45 p.m. in that rain and watched the students spill out in their waterproofed clusters, phones out, voices loud, the collective exhale of young people released from the day's container. And he saw Charlotte before she saw him. She was at the edge of the group coming through the main doors, not behind them exactly, but positioned in the particular way of someone who has learned to exist at the margin of a crowd. Not outside it, not inside it. The inhabited borderland. She had her bag on both shoulders, her blazer dark with rain across the shoulders from the short exposed walk, her chin doing that millimeter elevated thing that meant something was being held. Behind her, not far enough behind her, came Margot. Declan couldn't hear the words. He could read the geometry. Margot said something. Her orbit laughed. Charlotte's pace didn't change. Not faster, not slower, which was itself an act of enormous grinding discipline that Declan recognized the way you recognize a technique you've used yourself. "I don't let them see it land." He watched. His hands stayed at his sides. Charlotte reached the car, opened the door, sat down. The door closed. The geometry dissolved. He got in the driver's seat and looked at her in the mirror. Her eyes were dry. She was looking out the window at the rain, and her expression was the expression of someone counting their own breaths. "Did you have an umbrella today?" he asked. A beat. "No," she said. "There's one under the seat," he said. "For tomorrow." She looked at the back of his head for a moment in a way he felt without seeing. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the umbrella." He put the car in gear. He went to see Ms. Arundel on a Friday afternoon. He'd thought about it for 4 days, turned it over, examined it from the angle of his job and from the angle of the other thing, the sealed room, and the door he kept walking past, decided finally that they were the same angle, that protecting someone was not separable into professional and personal, that if you tried to make that separation, you got the geometry wrong. Ms. Arundel received him in her classroom, tidying papers with the distracted efficiency of a woman who tidied as a form of thinking. She had Virginia Woolf on the board still from the morning. A woman must have money and a room of her own. He told her what he'd observed. Precisely, the way he'd been trained, without editorializing, without the sealed room. Ms. Arundel listened with her glasses pushed into her hair and her hands stilled on the papers. "I've been watching it too," she said. "It's layered, deliberately so." "Yes," he said. "Charlotte hasn't said anything." "No." "Would she? To you?" And he thought about this honestly. "No. Not about this. Not yet." Ms. Arundel put the papers down. She looked at him with the directness of someone who has had a great many conversations that mattered and knows the look of another person having one. "She handles it," Ms. Arundel said. "That's not nothing. But handling something and being okay aren't the same thing." "I know," he said. He drove home that evening by a longer route, past the canal, past the park where the lights were on now at 5 o'clock because it was November, past a chip shop that smelled like the best version of ordinary life. He thought about Chauvin. He opened the door, just a crack. Just long enough to let himself remember that she'd handled things too, his girl, quietly and stubbornly and without asking for help, right up until the point she couldn't anymore. But that her handling of it had been, in retrospect, the loudest thing she'd ever tried to tell him. He pulled over, sat in the dark car by the canal. Let the feeling move through him, the way a wave moves, not fighting it, not steering it, just holding still while it passed. Then he drove home. He called the palace's family liaison in the morning. The liaison, a woman named Dr. Vance who had a doctorate in child psychology, and the careful, unhurried manner of someone who understood that rushing a thing sometimes breaks it, had 3 conversations in the following 10 days. One with Ms. Arundel, one with the head mistress, one with Queen Isabeau. Declan was not present for any of them. He drove Charlotte to school. He stood at the gates. He watched the geometry. He put an umbrella under the back seat. So Charlotte found out about the conversations on a Wednesday. Not from Dr. Vance or her mother or Ms. Arundel, from Theo, who had overheard something in the staff room corridor that he reported to her in the library with the compressed, breathless urgency of someone delivering intelligence under fire. "They're going to do something about Margot," he said. Charlotte set her book down. She was very still for a moment. "What kind of something?" "I don't know exactly." Arundel looked. He searched for the word. Formal. Charlotte stared at the table. Something moved across her face that Theo, who was not unperceptive, for a boy of 11 who communicated primarily in Morse code, couldn't quite name. It wasn't relief. It wasn't anger. It was something more complicated than either. At the expression of a person recalibrating their understanding of an equation they thought they'd solved. Someone had noticed. Someone had said something. Someone had, without asking her, without waiting for her, moved. She confronted Declan about it on the drive home. Not loudly. Charlotte didn't do loud, not the way some people mean loud. But there was a directness in the way she leaned slightly forward in her seat that he'd learned to read as the equivalent, for her, of raised volume. "You spoke to someone at school," she said. He didn't insult her by pretending otherwise. I raised a concern with the family liaison, yes. That was my situation to handle. Yes, he said. You went around me. He drove for a moment. Chose his words the way he chose positions. For stability, for range. I watched a situation for 7 weeks, he said. I weighed my role. I decided that watching was no longer enough. That was my decision, and I made it. It wasn't yours to make. Some of it was. Silence. The car turned onto the long avenue that led to the palace's east gate. She would have kept going, Charlotte said. Not Margot. The way she said it told him she meant herself. I would have been fine. I know, he said, but fine isn't a ceiling. She was quiet for the rest of the drive. At the gate, she gathered her bag, paused with her hand on the door. Did you always watch this carefully? She asked. He looked at her in the mirror. He could have said, yes, it's my job. He could have said something carefully bounded by the parameters of his role. He said, I had a daughter once. She was your age. I didn't watch carefully enough. And he said it the way he might set something heavy down. Without ceremony, without release, just the simple transfer of weight from one place to another. Charlotte didn't say anything. She got out of the car. She walked through the gate. She did not look back. But she carried it. He could tell, in the particular way her shoulders sat differently, the millimeter of something that wasn't elevation this time, that she was carrying it. That was all right. That was, he thought, exactly what the truth was for. End of part 2. The formal conversation with Margot happened on a Monday. Charlotte was not in it. She was in English reading Wolf. Ms. Arundel had switched the Year 7 curriculum slightly without explanation to include a room of one's own, in which Charlotte read with the focused attention of someone receiving a message written specifically for them. She didn't know what was happening in the headmistress's office. She found out from Theo at lunch. Margot cried, he reported, with the slightly stunned respect of someone who'd considered Margot impervious to consequence. Like, actually cried. Charlotte absorbed this. Is that all? She asked. Theo blinked. What more do you want? She thought about this. Genuinely. I don't know yet, she said. She ate her sandwich. She looked out the window at the November garden. Bare trees, a bird on the fence, the small, perfect world beyond the glass that didn't know about Margot or headmistresses, or what it cost to hold yourself together in a corridor while a copper-haired girl sharpened her smile on you. I think I want her to understand, Charlotte said. Not just be sorry. Theo looked at her for a long moment. That's really hard to make happen. I know. Most people just settle for the sorry. I know, she said. That's why most people stay stuck. She asked to speak to Margot herself. This was, by any protocol, unexpected. Dr. Vance looked uncertain. The headmistress looked uncertain. Ms. Arundel looked uncertain in a different way. The uncertain look of someone who is surprised and pleased simultaneously. Queen Isabeau, when it was relayed to her, sat very still for a moment in her chair in the morning room and looked at the report in her hands. Then she said, let her, just that. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon in a small room off the library. 2 chairs, a table, no particular staging. Ms. Arundel was present technically. I seated near the door with papers she was technically reading. Margot came in first. She was copper-haired and careful, and her eyes had the particular quality of someone who had recently cried and was very determined not to again. She sat with her hands folded, a gesture Charlotte recognized with a small shock as similar to her own first morning in the car. Charlotte sat across from her. There was no version of this that had a script. Charlotte had understood that from the start. A script would have been the Queen's version. Correct? Thorough, sealed. She wanted her own version. She looked at Margot directly. I'm not here to be angry at you, she said. I'm done being angry. Margot looked slightly wrong-footed. She'd been expecting anger, Charlotte understood. had possibly rehearsed responses to anger. "I want to ask you something," Aunt Charlotte said. "You don't have to answer. But I want to ask it. Okay?" Margot said warily. "What did I do that scared you?" The room went very still. Ms. Arundel's papers stopped. Margot's expression moved through several things in quick succession: contempt, reflexive, and then confusion, and then something beneath the confusion that was raw and didn't have a name yet. "I wasn't scared of you," Margot said. "You were," Charlotte said. "Not unkindly, certainly, not of me specifically. Of something I represented. I just want to know what." Margot opened her mouth, closed it. The silence was the length of a building deciding which way to fall. "You don't care," Margot said finally. Her voice was slightly different, stripped of the decorative knife quality, just a voice. What anyone thinks. You just sit there with your book and you don't care and everyone can see it and it's—" She stopped. "Infuriating?" Charlotte offered. "Yes, because it means I'm not available. Yes." The word came out smaller than Margot intended. "And if I'm not available, you can't use me for anything." Silence. "That's very lonely," Charlotte said. "What you have. The thing you built." Margot looked at her with an expression that was, for the first time, entirely undefended. It lasted about 3 seconds. Then the defenses came back. Not the knife. Something quieter. Something more like a door pulled shut than a blade drawn. But 3 seconds was enough. Charlotte had not come to fix Margot. She understood clearly, with the 11-year-old version of a wisdom she'd spend the rest of her life refining, that she couldn't fix Margot, and that trying would be its own kind of condescension. She'd come for herself, to look at the thing that had been done to her and name it in the presence of the person who'd done it, and to survive the naming. She stood up. "I'd like us to just leave each other alone," she said. "Not friends, just not this." Margot nodded. Once. Charlotte left. In the corridor, she stood against the wall for a moment and breathed. The building smelled like school buildings smell. Floor cleaner and pencil shavings and something cafeteria adjacent that never entirely dissipated. The most ordinary smell in the world. She breathed it in. Something in her chest loosened. Not a full release. Not the clean, cinematic version of relief, but a partial one. Like a fist unclenching one finger at a time. I'd like the particular first thaw of November giving way. Not warmth, but the beginning of the memory of warmth. Theo appeared at the far end of the corridor, clearly having been waiting with aggressive casualness. "How'd it go?" "Fine," she said. He looked at her face. "It went better than fine," he said. "Don't push it." He grinned. "Want to go look at the new books in the library?" Obviously. They walked. Declan Foyle was at the gate at 3:45. The rain had stopped. A thin, tentative sun was doing something experimental with the November clouds. Not committing to warmth exactly, but considering it. The students came out in their usual clusters. He saw Charlotte. Her bag was on one shoulder today, not both. It was a small thing. The kind of thing that required 20 years of watching to notice. She walked to the car and got in. He got in. He put the car in gear. She said from the back seat without preamble, "I talked to her." He kept his eyes on the road. "How was that?" "Harder than I expected." A pause. Also easier. He nodded. "She's not a villain," Charlotte said. "She's just a person who learned the wrong thing about how power works. He drove. That's a considered view," he said. "My mother would say the same thing about most of the difficult people she deals with. Your mother is wise." "Yes." Another pause. "So are you. Sometimes." He almost smiled. "High praise. Don't let it go to your head." They drove through the afternoon. The tentative sun persisted, neither succeeding nor giving up. The canal flashed past, just a glimpse, silver gray and briefly lit. "Sergeant Foyle," she said. "Ma'am, Chauvin, just the name, placed carefully in the car like something precious and breakable. Did she like to read? He drove for a moment. The sealed room. The door he'd opened a crack. Everything she could get her hands on, he said. Drove her teachers mad. She'd finish whatever they assigned in the first week and then spend the rest of the term reading under the desk. Charlotte was quiet. She sounds brilliant, she said. She was. No more. That was all there was room for in the car, in the particular language they'd built between them across 8 weeks and long silences and a spare umbrella and 2 words set down carefully in the space between a guard and the girl he was guarding. But it was enough. It was, Charlotte thought, as the palace gates appeared ahead, and the car slowed and the whole enormous apparatus of her life arranged itself outside the window. It was more than enough. It was a room. Her own. The formal report filed by Sergeant Declan Foyle for the week ending November 17th noted, as required, all relevant security observations, route assessments, and protocol adherences. In the section marked Additional Notes, he wrote 3 words. Charge doing well. He filed it. He drove home by the short route. He stopped at the chip shop. He sat in his car in the dark and ate from the paper bag and listened to the radio play something that Chauvin would have called old person music and laughed about. He let himself laugh. Just a little. Just enough. End of Part 3. Copyright The Palace Guard, watched in silence.